So let's talk about something useful that we might want to do once we understand the attribute table and what we're looking at. Well, I think the most important thing that we can do with attributes are what are called attribute queries. Right? Attribute queries. And basically, the goal of an attribute query is to go through an attribute table and pull out certain features based on their attributes. Right? Again, we're trying to select certain features based on their attributes. And you can kind of imagine intuitively why this would be useful. Right? If, for example, we had a point data set of crimes and you were interested in gun crimes specifically, well, it would be useful to be able to open up that data set and say, hey, give me, or select, I should say, select all of the crimes where a gun was involved. And you would have an attribute that would allow you to make that distinction, right? And so when it comes to doing attribute queries, there's going to be three things that we have to have. The first thing we have to have is a variable name, right? So this is going to control what variable we're looking at. Right, then we need to have some sort of a comparison. Right, and this is going to be a mathematical comparison to be executed. Right. And then the last piece is going to be a value. Right, and this value is going to be the value against which that variable is compared. Right. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to pick and generate these three pieces, a variable, a comparison, and a value, to generate an expression. What's going to happen is we're going to take that expression that we make and we're going to look at each feature in the data set, run that expression through. If the comparison is true, right, so if whatever the variable is when you do the comparison to the value is true, we keep it, right? That's how we select things. If it's not true, we reject it. So it's not selected. And I know this might not make sense right away, but we're going to look at a bunch of examples, so hopefully this will start to become more clear. But at the end of the day, every attribute query that we write is going to have a variable name telling us what variable to look at, a mathematical comparison saying how are we comparing it, and then a value against which we're going to actually compare the variable. Okay. So variable name is going to come from the data set. The value we're going to pick ourselves because that's the thing that we're going to control for. And then we have this comparison. And I want to take just a minute and I want to talk about the types of comparisons that we can have. Right? So if you're used to sort of logical operators, this is going to look very similar. Right? So in terms of comparisons, what we can have is we can have things like equal to, right, which we express as an equals. Right? So is the variable equal to some value? Right? For example, if we were to think about the states, right, is the state's name equal to Alabama? That would find you all of the cities where the state name is Alabama. Right? We can have less than, right? We can have greater than, right? So if we think about that table with the cities, right, we could say, is the population less than 1 million? Right? That would grab all of the cities whose population in 2010 is less than 1 million. Same thing with greater than, right? We can have less than equal to, right? That's typically something like that. We can have greater than equal to, right? I want to take a second here because these two you typically won't see less than equal to, greater than equal to. Typically when we talk about this in common English, less than or equal to is typically referred to as at most. Right? Greater than or equal to is typically called at least. Right? If we have at least 15 people, that's greater than or equal to 15. Right? If we have at most 50 people, that would be less than or equal to 50. Right? So whenever you hear at most, it's less than or equal to. Whenever you hear at least, that's greater than or equal to. And then finally, we can have, right, not equal. Right? So that's going to have, right, equal to, not equal is an equal sign with a cross through it. This is basically going to go through and say, hey, wherever the variable is not equal to the value, give me that. Right? So just to kind of recap what these look like, right? Less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, is equal to, is not equal to, greater than, less than. And again, I just want to point out because it's very important, right? Less than or equal to is often called at most. Greater than or equal to is often called at least.